Hey there, welcome to another long-distance worship service. I'm Kleber Van Zandt, minister of the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Venice, where we strive to be a beacon of liberal religion for Florida's Sun Coast and a refuge for all who seek a welcoming community no matter your color, creed, ability, or class, no matter who you love, your gender expression, your political affiliation, or religious belief. Here we celebrate our differences as we learn from one another. If you'd like to know more about this congregation and its many opportunities for learning, growth, and connection, you can peruse our calendar and announcements on Facebook or on our webpage at uucov.org. If you're watching this on YouTube, please remember to like this video by hitting the thumbs up button icon below, leave us a note down in the comments section, and click the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Also, please consider surfing over to our website at uucov.org, clicking the donate button there and giving as generously as you can. We do hope you'll find something in this service that speaks to you and maybe lifts you up or challenges you in ways that lead to spiritual reflection and personal growth. We're glad you've chosen to join us. Welcome to church today. The prelude begins our worship.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
Our call to worship comes from the Reverend Jennifer Grayson, currently serving at Tree of Life Unitarian Universalist congregation in the Chicago metro area as their interim minister. We come together bound not by creed or a mutual desire to please one God or many, but we're drawn together by a belief that how we are in the world, that who we are together matters, and that love, not fear, will change this world. Let us worship together. Our hymn is number 189, Light of Ages and of Nations, first verse.
Glimpses of thy truth sublime, always spirits enwrapped vision, past the heavenly veil within. Always hearts bowed in contrition, found salvation from their sin.
Our children have their own religious education class by Zoom each Sunday at 10 a.m. If you'd like to attend or to help your child to attend, login information can be found on our website at uucov.org or on our Facebook page. This week, we have a piece from the Washington, D.C. Singer-songwriter who posts on YouTube under the name This Is Leah.
Father, mother, sister, brother.
Father, mother, sister, brother,
All are part of me.
all are part of me.
Teacher, friend, here within, they are all a part of me.
Teacher, friend, here within, they are all a part of me.
I love myself as I love you.
I love myself and I love you.
We touch each other and make life true.
We touch each other and make life true.
I am part of this community. It is part of me. I am part of this community. It is part of me. Guys, what is a community?
I don't know.
That's a big word. How would you explain what a community is, Jacob?
I would say that it's a group of people or animals or even plants that live next to each other or close together, and they help each other when they need something.
That is a wonderful description. I love that you included animals and plants because we don't always think about the fact that they're alive and they interact. And in fact, sometimes if you think about how animals and plants interact, right?
Yeah.
And we, of course, as part of the ecosystem, as part of the animal kingdom, we interact. So our community is even bigger than the community of people who live and work together. What a great idea. So, is our family a community? Is school a community?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let me ask, would it be nice if everyone in a community was the same?
I don't think so, because if everyone was the same, then no one would be able to have new ideas so that we can make the world a better place.
That's a really good idea. Also, if all the members of a community were bees, then how would they make the honey? Where would they get their nectar? And if all the members of the community were flowers, how would they pollinate themselves? We really do work together, right? And we need each other. So, one of my favorite sayings is by the Buddha. It says that the foot feels the foot when it touches the ground. Do you know what that means? The foot feels the foot when it touches the ground. What do you think that means?
Maybe that the foot feels itself touching the ground when it touches the ground.
That's what I think too. I think it means that the foot becomes really aware of what it is when it comes in contact with something else. Because of course a foot can just float in space and be kind of aware of itself. But when it has a relationship with something else, it feels itself in relationship with that other thing. And I think that is part of the joy of living in communities. All of our relationships help us to understand who we are. I am part of this community. It is part of me.
Let's join our hearts and minds together in a spirit of meditation that begins with a prayer from the Reconstructionist tradition of Judaism. Eternal One, God of our ancestors, may it be your will that wars and bloodshed be abolished, that we bring into the world a lasting peace. And let no nation learn the ways of war. Let all who dwell on earth acknowledge the truth of truths, that we have not come into this world for the sake of quarreling or hatred, anger or bloodshed, but have come into this world only to know you. Have mercy upon us and fulfill what is written, I shall give peace upon the earth, and you shall lie down with none to make you afraid. We lift up those in this community who face change, challenge, or loss this day as we hold within our hearts all who suffer. And now we pray each in our own ways into the silence. The hopes of this community are offered forth in the names of all those who've gone before and in the names of all those who will come after, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Shalom, salam, amen, and blessed be. The interlude is Mansions of the Lord, presented here by the U.S. Army Trumpet Ensemble. Once upon a time, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Assyria, became enraged at his western provinces because they had refused to send troops to fend off the Medes. From his court in Nineveh, Nebuchadnezzar called together a great army under his bloodthirsty general, Holofernes, and told them, "Go show those people who's boss." Holofernes, who had slaughtered his way through many lands, led a great horde toward Jerusalem, stopping to lay siege to the little city of Bethulia in Israel, telling those Bethulians to either surrender or die, promising that no man shall escape. The patriarchal leaders of the Bethulians wrung their hands for weeks and then prayed to their God that if God did not deliver them from the Assyrians in 5 days, the Bethulians would begin to worship Nebuchadnezzar. A widow in the town named Judith overheard the leaders' plans and decided she should try to do something about this. Judith called the leaders to her own home and told them that they were wrong to try to bargain with God, that this was just not the way the universe worked. And she was determined to bring what good she could to this bad situation. But what could she do in only 5 days? Judith came up with her own plan. She had her maidservant prepare ritually pure foods while Judith dolled herself up. They loaded up a donkey and headed out at night across no man's land. When they reached the lines of the Assyrians, they were escorted by guards to the tent of Holofernes, and Holofernes was overcome with Judith's beauty and her come-hither attitude, and he promised her that if she would give him information about the Bethulians, then she and her maidservant would be spared. 4 uneventful days passed, during which Holofernes grew more and more smitten with the idea of seducing Judith. When he could hold himself back no longer, he invited Judith to dine with him. Judith accepted, and on the 5th day showed up in his tent, fit to kill, in a smoking hot outfit. At the feast, Judith spoke seductively to Holofernes, telling him, "This is the greatest day of my life," and apparently addressing him as Lord, though in her own mind she was very careful to speak such words only to her God rather than to Holofernes. Refusing the food of the Assyrians, she ate only the ritually pure food prepared by her maid, while Holofernes, as men do, in stories at least, made a fool of himself, drinking himself into a stupor as he dreamt of taking Judith. When evening fell, Holofernes commanded everyone but Judith to leave the tent, and then immediately passed out drunk. Again, as I've read, men do. Judith unsheathed Holofernes' sword, and with a couple of healthy chops, hacked off his head. The women put the head into a food bag and made their way undiscovered back to Bethulia. On their arrival, Judith was declared a great hero, and the Israelite army prepared to chase away the Assyrians in a great rout at daybreak the very next day. Judith lived happily ever after, choosing to remain a widow for the rest of her 105 years. On her death, she freed her slave and distributed her holdings to her husband's next of kin, as any good and proper childless Israelite widow would do. And to this day, Judith remains a hero of Israel and a woman among women. The end. It's a delightful story and heartwarming, kind of. It's not the usual patriarchal, androcentric type you're used to from much of the biblical text. And it does sound biblical, doesn't it? But is it? Well, for Catholics, the book of Judith is indeed biblical, and it's found in their canon. For Protestants, though, you'd have to look for it in the Apocrypha, those deuterocanonical books, mostly written originally in Greek rather than in Hebrew. As for the Jews, the book of Judith is not found in the Hebrew Bible because it is so clearly non-historical. Your first clue to the story's non-historicity is that Nebuchadnezzar was never king of Assyria. He was king in Babylonia. And he was never in Nineveh. Hello? How much of a telegraph do you need to tell you that this is a fairy tale rather than a history? There are plenty of other clues along the way as well. For instance, there is no historical evidence that a town named Bethulia ever existed, but we really don't have to search too hard because the word Bethulia itself means virginity. The jokes continue. When Holofernes threatens that no man will escape, he's technically correct. It's three feminine types that leave Bethulia after his death that night: Judith, her maidwoman, and a donkey, a female one. The name Judith itself is the feminine form of the name Judah, as in Judah Maccabee. Judah and Judith are the prototypical Jewish man and Jewish woman, whence the term Judean. This prototypical Jewish woman happens to be a knockout in more ways than one. She has brains, she is clever in ways we wish we were, and she finds paths to victory that elude the rest of us, certainly far outpacing the men in this story. She is beautiful, as I said, a smoking hot femme fatale, whose wiles cannot be resisted by any man, especially weak ones like otherwise powerful Assyrian generals. Many scholars have stated that they see Judith as a feminist icon. She is singularly rich, she is powerfully religious, and she is perfect in so many ways. To emphasize her strength as a woman, she even keeps an all-female household. But Judith also at times is unabashedly, or she does unabashedly exhibit traits normally reserved for masculine figures. She places chains on her legs in order to keep her gait short, like a proper woman, she says. She lies up a storm to Holofernes. Men lie, women don't, do they? She is pious. She loves her God. She understands the universe in ways the male leaders of her community have long forgotten, if they ever knew. Pious, yes, but she is not willing to sit back and wait for prayers to be answered. She is committed to taking action. She is confident in her own abilities to plan and then execute those plans. At one point in devising her plan, Judith brings to mind the story of Shechem, in which all the men in the army of the enemy were convinced to be circumcised one day, and in their pain and agony the next day were slaughtered. This allusion to circumcision draws an undeniable connection to the later beheading of Holofernes. And the sexual overtones as well. Judith plays the come-on to Holofernes to the hilt, but then after her big adventure, spends the rest of her days unmarried and chaste, even though many approach her with propositions of marriage. So here within a little story that begins to sound like a parody of the Dionysus worship with its drunkenness and pleasure-seeking, there's also lust and chastity, circumcision and beheading, castration, penis envy. I'll stop. Goodness gracious, don't read this to the children, please. Speaking of the children, you may want to usher any with you today away from your screen for a moment while we show you a few images from the art world depicting Judith and her heroic act. Now, the first one is from the artist Caravaggio, who produced this image in about 1600. It shows his usual bright colors in the foreground in front of a dark background. Judith removing Holofernes' head with a sword while her maidservant looks on. Judith's expression is one of determination and perhaps just a touch of disgust. This painting hangs in the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Antica, the National Gallery of Antique Art in Rome. Now, another image, this by Artemisia Gentileschi, hangs in the Uffizi Museum in Florence. If anything, I find this even more gruesome, and Judith even more determined in her work. This was painted in about 1620, or some 10 years after Gentileschi herself had been assaulted by an artist friend of her father's. Is she here seeing Holofernes as a stand-in for her own attacker as she hacks away? Certainly appears so. And a third, much later image, this from Gustav Klimt, painted in 1901. Klimt enjoyed using gold leaf, apparently, and from the look on her face, his Judith has other things on her mind than in the previous two paintings. The fact that her torso is exposed under a sheer coverlet might misdirect the viewer into failing to notice the head of Holofernes already hanging there on Judith's left side. Klimt apparently thought the general's head so subtle that he had his brother build a gold frame for the painting with the title Judith and Holofernes etched across the top crosspiece of the frame. These are only three of the more famous images of Judith in Renaissance and contemporary art. This story of Judith seems everywhere in art museums, and it has piqued many, many fertile imaginations down through the centuries. Now, some scholars have called her a feminist. Others have branded Judith an anti-feminist. Some point out that, in the end, Judith toes the patriarchal line, distributing her property to her husband's people and releasing all her slaves, one, as a reminder to all those other childless widows across Israel, this is what is expected of us women. This is what we women do. This is who we women are. So much for radical feminism. But what does Judith's story have to say to modern and postmodern women involved in social justice activities or politics? For one thing, and potentially more inspiring to young girls studying Torah in synagogue or shul than all those chapters full of male-centric storylines, Judith's character and actions sound a direct challenge to the dominant patriarchal narrative. In that dominant narrative, women were denied independence and blocked from leadership roles. Women's bodies were most often seen as inferior and corrupt. Judith's arrival on the scene hails the eventual coming of a more equal, more just, more inclusive society, empowering previously powerless women to help build a liberating new society of love and justice, truth and peace. But what then shall we do with the violence in this tale? Judith achieves peace through violence, and if liberation requires violence, the story seems to say, well, that's okay. That's an acceptable price to pay for safety and survival. No matter how we resist, our conscious minds lean toward judgments about Judith's goodness or badness. Over the centuries, she's been condemned as a liar and a harlot on the one hand, and celebrated as a savior on the other. Isn't she both? Aren't we all? But what to make of her self-imposed celibacy after her singular heroic act? If we wish to look to Judith as a feminist hero, we might expect her to return home to take a leadership role or to step into the public sphere or at least exert her newfound power by further subverting the patriarchy or resisting some oppressive societal expectations. But no, she returns to private life, submissively playing the part of the socially acceptable widow. In the end, perhaps she is no feminist. Perhaps it would be wrong to ask her to be in first century before the Common Era. Judith has excelled in her homeland security role, providing a role model for generations of young women. What else can we ask? Scholars can debate whether Judith was or was not a feminist. We can worry over whether she is or is not a good role model for young girls. I've come to have a different problem with the Judith story. That story says that Judith, as a young adult, dutifully got married and formed a household, what you could call one of the building blocks of society. In her middle years, again, dutifully, she had a chance to do something bigger than most, actually. And when that opportunity arose, she stepped up to take a hero's journey into a far country where she used all the strength and resources at her disposal to accomplish a great feat. On her return from that hero's journey, she was celebrated as a hero. However, after that journey and the public celebration of it, she then backed away from the more public sphere to what the writer of the story believed, spend the rest of her years in private solitude. This is where the story falls apart most keenly for me. As I've learned from many of you, this private solitude of Judith's later life doesn't begin to convey the depth and importance of the hero's journeys of our later years when we're no longer called upon to save our people by traveling outward to a far country. The hero's journey we are eventually invited to engage in our later years turns out to be in the other direction. Not so much far and wide, but rather to that far country, that alien space that is deep and internal. The heroes I've met and continue to meet in this congregation have shared their joys and their triumphs, their satisfaction and their pride, as well as their worries and their fears, their doubts and misgivings. And while no one I've met here yet has admitted to beguiling and then beheading an Assyrian general, still you, have done some pretty amazing things and have come a long way in life. And you, are models for all those coming along behind, whether or not you choose to recognize it or choose to admit it. So, my gratitude to all who engage your own later in life heroes' journeys, and that includes the people in our memorial book, the ones whose names are out on our memorial wall, all those who live in blessed memory, and those of you members and friends watching this service today. This congregation should be proud to have such heroes among us, just as the Bethulians and the Israelites and the Jews have been proud to count Judith as one of their own. So may it be. Our hymn is number 104, When Israel Was in Egypt's Land. First and last verses.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. We need not always weep and moan. Let my people go and wear those slavery chains forlorn. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
And now a benediction from the Reverend Kathy Huff. Our time in this place may have ended, but our connection to each other and to this community remains. Together may we walk the path of justice, speak words of love, live the selfless deed, trod gently upon the earth, and fill the world with compassion. Until we meet again. Go in peace, walk softly on your paths, and may the light of love shine on you all your days.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we